Program 7 is the last one in this series of workshops. There had been some confusion over the dates, and some students had not realized we had switched to this date. Some participants had not realized we had switched to this date. And so there was relatively low turnout compared to the other sessions. First issue, but the issues that were raised are so important, I'm including it in this series. The first issue is raised by a visually impaired PhD student, and it explores the issues of his involving a first class or his involving conducting a first class. These include the importance of a discussion of the need for them to translate visual cues into verbal cues. For example, speaking out rather than just raising their hands. The need to use verbal expression of what are often only visual cues, such as students rolling their eyes at a comment of another student, glazing over, etc., or lost, are also discussed. The point being made that it's important that these things become verbal, whether the instructor is visually impaired or not. I also present the third and the final group theorist, Homans, who authored the classic text on the human group. We then use the model to consider the role of a faculty member when students complain about their school. This happens often. The faculty member does not want the class to turn into a complaint session, and yet at the same time, we teach that social workers have responsibilities to try to influence their agency. Shouldn't an instructor in a social work class have a responsibility to try to influence the school? A final example is presented by a PhD student who's teaching in another program and whose one-year contract is ending and cannot be renewed for some internal organizational issues. She is angry because she would like to continue. She had excellent evaluations, strong student positive evaluations, and very strong student negative reactions to her not being renewed. The discussion moves into an exploration of the boundaries between and the importance of not letting one's own feelings influence how one ends with one's students. The importance of modeling professional behavior, even when you're having to leave a school that you don't want to, is stressed. And that brings the programs to a close. Let's see. Elaine, is there something going on in your class that you want to use the session for? And we could also take some time to talk about David's preparation for this course if he wants to. You know, some of the kinds of things he might be thinking about and getting ready to teach for the first time. And if there are any special issues you're concerned about, that would be important also. Mm-hmm. Anything on your?
The things that I feel like I would want to talk about are termination for two reasons. One is the seniors are ending their time
at
the undergraduate program and going to various and sundry places. And then my contract was for a year. And a lot, surprising to me, not only the juniors are starting to be upset that I won't be there next year, but the seniors are upset that I'm not staying at the school. And there's more, like every day someone comes and talks to me, how come you're not going to stay? And, different things have been said. So it's kind of awkward.
What do I say to them?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, on this, just to get a little bit more information, is it something you would have liked to have continued and just weren't? Is it you weren't because there are other people who teach those courses, or they can't teach them, or they don't like you? It could make a big difference in terms of the reason.
Yeah, the reason, when I took the job, it was for a year. That was the contract. So I knew that going in. And then they are looking for a new faculty member, but they want someone who has finished their degree, their PhD, because the current head of the program wants to step down really, really badly. She's really burned out.
They want to bring someone in who could move into the head of the program.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they don't have anybody internally.
No, they don't.
Up for it.
Yeah.
Again, this is not our school. It's
not
in the graduate program in the area that you teach in.
Yeah.
So would it be helpful if we spent just a little time thinking about what do you say to students when they raise this, what's appropriate, what's ethical? I've had experience in this, so myself, I can share it when we get
to good.
Where I had to bite my tongue, in order to be to be what I thought was professional, even though a part of me would have liked to have said something else, which maybe would have been less professional. Is that really how do I handle this?
That's definitely part of it.
How do I demonstrate and model for students the way they should be ending with their clients, even if they get a pink slip that says, your job is ended, and a lot of them may be angry at that or cutbacks or whatever. How do we help them not use their relationship with clients, as a way of acting out their own frustration? And one of the ways is we model it. So I think that would be good.
Okay.
David, I don't know if this is an issue for you or not, but you had mentioned the visual impairment issue. Is that an issue that might be of concern to you in terms of teaching a class that is a specific issue?
It's somewhat of a concern, but I think I'm okay with it. I think I've already thought how I'm going to deal with it, and I think because I know we talked, was it last semester, a little bit about disclosure, so I think I'm okay with that, but I do appreciate the offer. And the other thing is I am thinking, not in our field, but I do know someone in Toronto that's visually impaired in teaching, so I'm planning to who's taught several years, so I want to get their experience because I think it's give a different perspective as far as how to deal with the classroom. So yeah.
Well, one of the things we've done, you haven't been at every session, but one of the things we've done is we've talked about people beginning in first classes and how they set the tone and how they address issues, that may be issues that could emerge in the class and not just leave them under the surface. So it struck me that might be something that would be useful to you if you felt it was useful in terms of how do I handle first class when I come in and there'll be some obvious, visual impairment issues. How's that going to affect me? And how do I contract with my class around that? Or should I contract with my class around that? So the offer's on the table, but you don't have to take it.
Sure. Maybe I am, since offering, maybe I'll just to hear a little bit, because it's always good even to be reminded or may have heard something new. If it's possible sooner, I don't want to dictate.
I know, but you have to go.
Yes.
No, I was thinking of that. Is it okay with you? We'll just take a few minutes and do a little of the tuning in exercise and some strategizing about how would a person who begins a class with some obvious difference address that, or would it be addressed? Or what might be some of the ways the class can be engaged in being helpful? If that makes sense, we could do that, and we could talk a little bit about termination, and I can also present a little bit about Homans, because I did say Homans was of interest, and Homans would fit very nicely yours.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, we'll put you into Homans. Homans is systems theory, and you're talking about a systems theory issue. When you've thought about it, David, what thoughts have you had about that first class, when I walk into that first class? What area?
Well, there's a few things I've thought of, obviously. There's sort of the standard things where you go over the syllabus, the introductions, talking about the course, and I will be certainly open on the first class, saying that I do have a visual disability, and telling them, I guess, a few of things that I guess I wouldn't say need, but at least how I might do the class differently. And I'm trying to think, what else did I think about this? But that's just in brief, sort of.
Like what kinds of things would you do or do you need to do differently?
Right. I'm planning to say I'm not going to do much different. The only thing is, for example, I will tell them that I cannot see someone per se, but say if someone lifts up their hand, so I will be very specific, saying to them, I would prefer that they voice if they want to initiate. Let me see, what else am I thinking? I'm thinking more just in the class, sort of. What was it? And I'm trying to be, because I've learned from experience of clients to try to be brief and at the beginning. I think the other thing I would tell them is that I'm probably will not recognize faces at first at times, but I will tell them if I can't. So that way they don't feel, that they're worried. So I think I'm going to try to convey the message that there won't be a lot of different, but there will be a little bit. So yeah.
Reaction if you're in the class, and as opposed to ignoring it, as part of the opening. He's going to do the syllabus, he's going to do the regular stuff, but he puts on the table and says, look, there is this visual impairment, and here are at least a couple of the ways I see it might be affecting me, and I want to work out some agreement in the class about how we'll handle it. What's your reaction as a student in class?
I just think it's kind of a typical class then.
You accept it?
Yeah, it's really not a big deal.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I would too. It would be weird to not address it, because then the message is we can't talk about that. So if we don't know what's going on, we can't even explore the possibilities.
And this is a class on human behavior.
Yeah.
And the social environment. Isn't that an issue? That's one of the central issues in the class, which is diversity of people. And I mean, it's right on target in terms of the process and content issue. How about, let me throw one out myself, and I was thinking about, I depend, and we depend a lot, on visual cues from the class. And I can't tell you how often in this workshop we've talked about a faculty member who says, I'm looking out of there and I'm saying to myself, they're bored stiff, they're not interested, they're resentful, you know, and I'm not dealing with it. And remember, we've talked in a number of classes about how do you reach that. So how are we going to handle the nonverbal cues about how things are going in the class? And is there any way that an instructor can, at the very beginning, set some ground rules about that might make it, you know, possible for him to be more informed about what he might not see, which we would see. But I'm not saying we deal with it. I mean, over and over again, we had in this workshop people coming in and saying, I could tell, I knew with this or that, I didn't have the courage to raise it, and they go back the week after. So what kind of a contracting would you do on that, if that sounds of interest to you? Because I think that's going to be one of the harder parts. The parts you're describing, you can work on them. You know, they can do that. You can ask them, take responsibility, voice, don't be surprised if I don't recognize you. There might be some other things. But what about that part? What if David were to say to them in that very first class, there's another thing, you know, I mean, you'll be sending cues to me sometimes non-verbally. Maybe I've lost you, or we're off on a topic that's difficult, or you have free associating and stuff, and I may not always see it, you know. I want you to let me know. That becomes your responsibility, to let me know. I don't want to have to go class after class and not know. Does that sound like something?
That might actually be good in any
class.
Of course. Yeah, it is.
I'm thinking, wait a minute.
Of course it is. And it's awfully good when they say it to a client. When they say, I may not always be reading you, I may not always be understanding, you know, or if there's differential issues working with a client who's quite different from you, it's awfully good to be able to say, if you ever feel I don't understand what's going on for you, because I don't have kids or whatever, I really want you to let me know. That's a wonderful modeling for their work with clients. Wouldn't it be helpful if an instructor, and of course it's easy, we've discussed this a number of times, David, a lot of the ideas here are a lot easier to do once you've had a lot of experience and comfort. The time you need to do them, at the beginning, they're not so comfortable, you know, at that point. And yet, what would your reaction be if the new instructor put around a table that he recognizes there are times that you may not be connecting, or you may be free associating to other stuff, and it would be important for him to know? What was your reaction? I think you're right, by the way.
I would think that he had a lot of experience.
It sounds...
I would have no clue that it was your first class.
It sounds like a more confident instructor, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, who puts that out on the table. And of course, Amy's quite right. That would be useful in any class to have a conversation. But I think it becomes even more important. What could the class do? What would be some ideas? What would you want the class to do if there was a point where there was a reaction, but you're not seeing it? There are a lot of different things. For example, if somebody's made a comment and Amy rolls her eyes, or half the class, somebody says something that has a racist or homophobic or some other content to it, and people are reacting, and you're hunching they're reacting, but you're not seeing them react.
Right.
At that point. What's your thoughts?
Well,
is this on target, by the way, David? Is this helpful?
Yeah,
Good.
yeah. Actually, there's a couple things I didn't think of, so it's good at reminding. Well, I think, and this is what I think I was saying, because this is what I've done with clients, and it's been fun sometimes working years, where, you know, I do tell them, okay, I can't see, but I can sense it, so, but if I do miss something, you know, I don't mind you letting me know, in a respectful way, and it depends on the situation. I mean, it might be better, you know, till the end of the class, or if there's a break, depending. I mean, if the class is really flowing, probably doesn't make sense to stop it. But it depends. So and that may not. I know some people don't like that response with it depends, but I think that's the.
Well, what you're asking the students is make a judgment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at some points there might be something they want to share with you during the break or even after a class or between a class. It might not make sense right at that moment. But what you're saying is, I'm open to hear this category of feedback, which is the most important feedback you're going to get as a teacher. Students will often glaze over. And they're glazing over sometimes because you're not being clear, or you're touching a topic area that is sensitive, or you're talking in human behavior. What are some of the areas on your syllabus? I'm trying to think. The first year human behavior course, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's on that syllabus? What are some of the sensitive areas, the difficult areas?
Abortion.
I mean, so to the degree that I can give some examples and at least put them on notice that I'm open to hearing what's going on if I don't sense it, you know, and. And again, David, you put your finger right on it. You're modeling for them exactly what they have to do with a client. It's so helpful in first sessions if they invite, let me know how things are going. You know, they may not take you up. They're not going to take you up. I'll tell you that right now.
Mm-hmm.
In the first classes, there's still the authority theme. We've talked about that in a number of classes. But you've made an invitation, and then you can come back to it again later. Anything else? Anything else that you've thought about?
Well, something I thought of because I think for the intervention class we're doing, I happened to be one of the students that did the full class, and one of the feedback, I thought it was helpful feedback that Rob gave me, but he said to be careful with being so open, because some students might take advantage of that, and I don't know if I could see that happening, but if there is a way of dealing with that.
What's your thoughts about it, about being open, in the area we're talking about? You know, we've already said there are some boundaries, you know, in this workshop, that some things are appropriate to share, some things may not. But what do you think about what he's raising right now, the concern about being careful about being open?
Well, I sat through that class, actually, and one of the things that I noticed was, like, as a student in your class, I was engaged almost, like, the entire class period. There wasn't really a point that I wasn't like, okay, I see where we're going and I see what we're doing, so... And I think that has a lot to do with, like, your personality and stuff like that. But I can kind of see how there could be some concerns, especially with, like, teaching an entire semester, where, you know, students might think, oh, well, I can get away with this in this class. No, he's not going to notice.
He isn't going to notice I'm playing poker on my computer in the back row. I'm giving real examples. I'm not making it up.
Yeah.
I've heard it. Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
I've heard in the bigger classes, but I'm sure that could be in our class too, or our programs.
Yeah.
So I guess what Amy's saying is that honesty on your part was compelling, and it really attracted students rather than created a problem. And if students are going to take advantage of you because of the impairment, they're going to take advantage of you whether you're open or not. I guess the question is, how do I hold them accountable, you know, for being sure not to? It's a very interesting issue that I think needs to be discussed in that class. And if you do some thinking about it, David, I'll bet you're going to find connections between your syllabus and this process. They are experiencing the syllabus in a sense. They're having an engagement with a person in a position of authority who brings into class a visual impairment, which is one of the areas that you focus on in human behavior. Not visual impairment necessarily, but people who have challenges, you know, that are different. And you got a live experience right here with them on that. I'm in a sense saying you can turn that to your advantage. And the other thing I like about what you did is you immediately went back to your practice. And so you learned the lesson that Elaine has said over and over again, and others have said over and over again, is that maybe my first class, but I know more about teaching than I realize. All I have to do is reflect how I handled this when I was in a different authority role. All right? Do you want to say anything on that, Elaine?
Well, absolutely. On that, absolutely. When I remember that, things go better. When I get panicky and lose sight of the fact that I have these transferable skills, then I feel less and less competent. And I was just thinking about, you know, human behavior. I mean, at least the way I taught it, I am teaching it now too, is that my real focus, because of the students, the type of students we're teaching, social work students, is diversity, 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 diversity. So I think my students don't have a field placement, so I spend a lot of time trying to find
third-year students, BSW,
yeah,
so not in field yet.
Yeah. So to find videos and other forms of media, or use case examples so that they can kind of have some life to it, that it's not just theoretical. So I think it'll be a real interesting challenge to them to not only learn about it, but here's a real person. How are you going to behave? How are you going to interact? How does this challenge you to really be, to practice what you say you preach? I think it'll be really a great opportunity for the students. I don't know. I don't know how big the class is. Do you know yet?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. I bet it's close to 20.
Yeah, that's my guess.
Yeah. So I would just, for your sake, I would just caution you, at least from my experience, that there'll be a wide range of sensitivity. Mm-hmm. So it's different than, if like when you're in one-on-one with a client. So
right. Yeah.
You'll get, I suspect, some people who are very, unskilled at how to deal with diversity. They have no clue.
And they'll be practicing with you.
Yeah, and they'll be practicing with you.
But in many ways, every one of our classes, whether you bring a visual impairment or not, it doesn't matter. Every one of our classes, they're practicing. They're practicing on how to relate to their peers. They're practicing on how to relate to people in authority, and it becomes an important learning thing, experience at that point.
Yeah.
When I walked in at the beginning, before everyone else arrived, you were talking with Steve about the what he did, and I'm just giving you a little of our own process right here. I heard you talk about the visual impairment and the use of that, and so when you said you're going to start to teach, my head said at that point, maybe this is an issue for you. Mm-hmm. Understand? And that's based on my assumption all the time that pre-session chatter has meaning. Mm-hmm. Just not sure what the meaning is, because you've been to sessions before. You never stopped and asked Steve what he did. He's been very insulted, by the way. Why nobody's asked him, but he did today. Understand? And so I have to assume, and I could be wrong, that there is some interest in this, and there's a connection between a teaching workshop and that. And that now becomes a topic. And I better model a willingness to put that on the table with you. Mm-hmm. Because I have to model that we don't duck an issue like that. Was this helpful to you?
Mm-hmm. Very much. Thank you.
You just made a very important contribution to this videotape. I'll tell you that right now. And to this discussion. Absolutely. This is a very, very important issue that you just, in many ways, raised for us, even though you may not have realized you were coming to do it. So you're going to come to the workshop next year and tell us what happens in those classes?
Yes.
Regularly?
if it fits in my schedule. Well, because I understand one of our colleagues teaches a class right at this time. So
at 5 o'clock? No.
I think maybe it ends at 5, but driving, because Nicole, she's in Rochester, her class this semester.
Mm. Well, if you can, we'd love to hear how it goes.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
It would be helpful. So I just went to David first because I knew he had a time thing, and he had to leave. How does Homans relate to Elaine's issue? Isn't that an interesting question? Well, let me just go over a little bit about Homans. You want to take a minute?
Yeah,
Give
definitely.
my Homans presentation?
Yeah.
And then talk about how does that help us think through a little bit of Elaine's issue. What George Homans wanted to do, and he's one of the classic theorists, is he wanted to develop a universal theory. And so what he did was he examined existing studies and tried to identify elements of behavior. And I sent you an outline on this, so I'm not putting it up on the board, that you could categorize into a larger unit. The 5 studies he looked at, I'll briefly review them. You've probably read them. Does anybody remember the Bank Street wiring room study? Western Electric Telephone Company. It's this classic sociology study where they wanted to improve efficiency, and so they went into where these people were wiring the old switches for telephones. This is before the electronic age, literally. And they try to adjust the lighting. They said, we'll make the lighting a little stronger, we'll make it a little lighter, will increase efficiency. And what they quickly discovered, in those days they could do studies like that without the men knowing that they were being studied by these efficiency experts. They didn't have, the kind of ethical issues that we would face now. They quickly discovered that the lighting had absolutely nothing to do with efficiency, but the work group had a lot to do. And so somebody would come in, a brand new worker, and he'd be very excited, and he'd start wiring, and he'd do 6 switches in a day. The norm was 5. He was a rate buster. And so what they suddenly discovered was the group pressure on him was in effect saying, indirectly and directly, you're busting the rate. You're creating a different norm here. And guess what? He started doing 5 switches. So without going into a lot of details, what the Bank Street wiring room showed them was that the group had a profound impact on people's, in this case, productivity. So he looked at that. The other one, which I know you know about, is the South Sea Island family, Margaret Mead. Remember Margaret Mead? Please tell me you read Margaret Mead at some point. And she looked at the South Sea family, and she tried to understand the norms, the taboo subjects. And so he took that as another level. Here's a work level, here's a family level. Street Corner Society, Norton, did an ethnographic study in Chicago of what would have been a pre-gang gang. It wasn't really a gang, but it was a group that developed on the street corner. And he tried to understand how did leadership emerge, for example. What was the way people affected each other? That's another classic study he included. He also looked at a study of a medium town, and he looked at one of a medium-sized company. So the key to his thinking was, what can I identify in every one of these levels, a town, a company, a work group, a family, that might be elements of behavior that I could see elsewhere. Very interesting approach to understand behavior. So if you ever get to read his book, you will reread some of those old studies, but you'll see Homans' analysis of them, in effect, and the way he used it to build the theory. Key was his thinking was the organismic model. I got that out again, clearly, as opposed to the mechanistic model, understanding the group as an organism, not a machine. Total change in thinking about how we understood productivity and group activity. He also believed that a group was an open system capable of growth, capable of emergent behavior, which a machine doesn't do. A machine doesn't grow except in science fiction movies. So in our HAL, for example, on 2001. So his concept was, if he understood the group as a thing that can grow using an organismic model, the question is what caused it to grow. And when he talked about it being an open system, he was suggesting that the boundary outside the group was permeable, so that you could not, in a nutshell, you couldn't understand what was going on in your class, if we talk about your class, okay, or your class, or your future class. You couldn't understand what was going on inside that class without understanding the interchange that was going on around that class. So what's happening in the school is going to have a profound impact on what happens in your class. What's happening in our society, Election Day, the death of John F. Kennedy. I still remember teaching a class the next day. There's no way you could walk into the class and not deal with the impact of that larger societal event. What's happening in our society in terms of changing values, for example. So you got to think of your class, if you use Homans' notion, as a small system within a larger system. That would be the school, which is in a larger system, the university, which exists in, I could keep on going. If we think of it that way, then the behavior at any level of the system can help explain some of the behavior at other levels. Now systems theory now sounds old hat. It wasn't old hat in those days. In fact, it was strikingly new. He also saw all elements of behavior as mutually dependent. Now, because of timing, I'm not going to read this, and you guys don't have copies. I'm sorry I didn't bring it with you. But essentially what he talked about was the internal and external system. And the internal system consisted of, let me just describe these, then we'll try to talk about how to apply this to a land situation. The major elements of behavior he talked about as sentiment, what we talk about in terms of emotion, interaction, people interacting with each other, having some contact, sentiment, interaction, and I know I'm going to block on the third, and activity. And what he said in effect was you could look at any group, and at any one point you could identify sentiment, interaction, and activity. I'll give you an example. This comes from an Irish poet. The father and son smiled at each other. They linked arms. They walked down the road together. This was the way they ended each day of work. I'll just take that sentence by sentence. The father and son smiled at each other. What are you seeing? Smiling. Are you seeing sentiment? So it's an element of behavior, the sentiment. They linked arms, interaction. All right. They walked down the road together, activity and interaction. This was the way they ended each day of work. It's a simple example, but what Homans would say is interaction affects sentiment, sentiment affects interaction. So you look at a study of dorms, and he did. He looked at college dorms, dormitories for college students, and he looked at if the interaction had positive sentiment, it led to more interaction. If the interaction generated negative sentiment, it led to less interaction. Less interaction had an impact on sentiment and activity. And the internal system was what he measured as the interaction, sentiment, and activity within the group. The external system was the interaction, sentiment, and activity between the group and the environment. So that's how we talked about external system. We talk about it differently. We talk about the external system as the agency, but that's not what Homans meant. Homans would say, if I can use your class as an example right now, Elaine's class, that the internal system is what's going on, sentiment, activity, and interaction between the students, each other, and you. The external system would be the sentiment, activity, and interaction between your class of students, or the students you've dealt with, and your school. Now, again, your school might be affected by what's going on outside. Cutbacks in funding, for example, can have a profound impact on the school, which in turn can have an impact on you. Now, have I, in 5 minutes, given you a kind of a brief description of a theorist who you ought to read on your own, because he's really quite wonderful, Homans. Not his second book. He became a behaviorist, and I didn't like his second book. But I liked his first book. I had feelings about the behaviorist. But his first book, I thought, was really quite brilliant, to see these same elements in a family, in a work group, in a town, and to be able, and a street corner group of kids, and to be able to describe what was going on in a dynamic way at every single level. So I found him helpful in thinking about my class. What does that mean? I'll give you a concrete example I'm working with right now. I have a last class last semester, and a group of students in the class are complaining when I walk in. I don't know if you remember, we have that form you have to fill out to show you take all your credits, right? And they just had that distributed, and the students are complaining. They say, why do we have to fill this stamp in? They have it on the computer. Can't they print it out? And I'm listening to the complaints, and they're not directed to me, but they're directed so that I could hear them. So I'm assuming the pre-meeting chatter, the pre-class chatter, has got some impact. There's a reason for it. So I open it up. I said, it sounds like you're complaining about this, and this is an issue I'll certainly bring to the external system, the school, which I did, attention to this. But it sounds like there's more than just this issue. And boom, out comes out a whole lot of feeling about students who are halfway through their second year and complaints. Now, I don't know if it's complaints of a specific group or not, or if it's this particular group of students or representative of a larger group of students.
Complaints about the school?
Oh, yeah. About problem field work, et cetera. So it occurs to me that we haven't had a survey of students since 2002 that addresses these issues, because we got busy with other stuff. So I tell the students, it sounds to me like what's happening right now in the school system is affecting your ability right now to interact right here in the class. And so I, as a faculty member, have a responsibility to raise this with the larger system. In other words, the sentiment, interaction, and activity between students in that class, or at least that group of students, and the larger school system is having a profound impact on their ability to engage, and they were letting me know. Now, let me be clear. It would have been inappropriate for me to spend the class now listening to complaints about the school. That's not right, and all I could do was ask them where the various places are they raise these concerns. Did they raise it with their faculty advisor, concentration chair, stuff like that? But I did promise them I would follow through and raise this with faculty, who voted unanimously, by the way. That's what we got to talk about, to do the survey again. But there are larger issues in the system that might affect whether the survey gets done or not gets done. And it would be naive of me to think that just because everybody voted to have a survey, that a survey would take place. Am I making some sense on how your thinking changes dramatically, and that you can't understand the behavior in your class without understanding the larger context of what's going on in the school, in the community, in the agency, in the political system, they're all affecting us. Let me just stop for a minute to see if I've made some sense around how I use Homans to make me think systemically. I mean, now they call it the ecological approach. They have all kinds of words for it. But it came from Homans. That's where it started. Anybody? Does that make sense? Because I just gave you a really quick course. I have a 32-page paper on Homans that I wrote in my doctorate. I don't think you're interested in that much Homans. But he's that, to me, important. So what's going on in Elaine's situation? And how do we understand sentiment, interaction, and activity? And how does Elaine address this issue that students are coming up and complaining about she's not being renewed? Good.
So could this be, like, possibly that, you already said that the head of the program wants to step down, and that kind of sounds like they probably know that,
I don't know if they know that or not, but as you were talking about that, for the seniors, I was especially surprised that some of them have come to me.
Were they in your class, the seniors, the year before?
No.
No, so they were never in your class?
No.
Oh, wow.
And some of them I have had both semesters, and some of them I have just had this semester. And some of those kids, those students that I just had this semester have come to me. I was really surprised. But as you talked, one of the things that might be going on for them is that particular group, due to I don't know what, a variety of things probably, they've had multiple changes of faculty during their time there.
There's some instability in the
So
system.
they're angry about it. And to see it happen again probably has a big piece of the, why they're doing that. And then I think, too, just because of, being around for so long, it's pretty hard, regardless of what the topic is or what the intervention is or what the theory is. I have something from my practice that I can just, spill out. And they really like that. So they haven't had as much of that from...
or at least they say that.
Or at least they say that, yeah.
We always have to recognize that what students perceive and say may or may not be as accurate, but they say that. They perceive it that way.
Yeah.
So a valued teacher is being lost. We've had a lot of instability. We're angry. So sentiment between this class group, even though it's not specifically a class group, and the environment of the school around it and the nature of the interaction is affecting what's going on between you and the students at this point.
Yeah, that makes much more sense to me now, why these seniors are saying this, because I was really surprised.
Because you understood the ones who were in your class may have really appreciated you and are having some difficulty around the fact that you're leaving, you're not going to continue, and you made a contribution. You're trying to figure out why you're getting this from other people.
Yeah, they're leaving the school. What are, kind of what's their investment in leaving someone behind that they like? They're not going to be there.
We know about burnout therapy. We know that sometimes when we finish, an experience, that's when all the stuff comes out, with clients, and sometimes negative stuff comes out at the end of the experience. People don't really share it during it. So you may have students who are also going through an ending.
And they are,
and it's not only it's an ending of their potentially academic career, unless they go on and get their master's in another school. So there's a lot of ending stuff in there as well.
A lot.
So if you were in Elaine's shoes, maybe a good place to start is, what would you feel like saying to them? Because I know what you feel like saying to them, what you're going to say to them is a little different. What would you feel like saying to them if you were in that situation? This is where I'm thinking back to my own similar experience in another school in another situation. What would you feel like saying to them? Because part of you has to be angry also, right?
Yeah.
Here I did my job, I did it well, I'm a popular teacher, and I'm still getting shafted because somebody wants to change their job.
Right.
Later.
Why can't you just wait 1 year and let me finish?
1 year.
Who knows? The job might be open.
It might be, yeah.
David, you were going to say something? Were you going to say something, Dave?
Oh, there was a couple of things. I was just thinking with clients, again, it's not totally the same, but where I've had that before. And, sometimes as far as what you want to say, you sort of, how can I say, what would be the word? I don't want to say vocalize, but sort of agree with their anger, sort of like, feel like you're at the same place as they are, like you're upset that you're leaving too, sort of like. And I've seen that some people want to say that, but probably what I have said, I'm just thinking, is more, my contract was for 1 year, and there's organizational issues, and
I'll miss teaching here at the school.
Yeah, and actually that's...
Mm-hmm.
And it's honest.
Mm-hmm.
It's honest. And what really David is saying is we have to avoid putting onto the students our own anger. They got enough of their own. I mean, there may be more to this conversation, but we have to avoid that. In my example, I won't go into the details at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm not going to go into details. But I had taught a human behavior class. It was really that group as well. But students were furious when they weren't going to, when I was leaving, because they weren't giving me from a lectureship to an assistant professorship. And it was all political. It all had to do with the theoretical approach I was teaching and all kinds of baloney. They came to me, the students all came to me, said, we're ready to go out and strike. They were. They're ready to go out and strike about this issue. Now, a big part of me, we're the better. Let's march, I told them not to, because it wasn't in their interest. It wouldn't be helpful to the school, and I wasn't going to stay anyway at this point because of the struggle. But I know I had a struggle with the part of me that was as angry as they were, and I also realized I had to demonstrate a boundary, that it would not have been appropriate for me as a professional instructor to encourage the students to do that. They want to do it, that's on their own, but they're not going to do it because I encourage them. And so I had to clarify, I am leaving, and I will miss teaching at the school, and I enjoyed having you in the class, and really it's great for me to hear that you also will miss me, that you appreciate it. I think we have to acknowledge that. That's part of endings. We do that with clients all the time. But I'm not going to cross the line of getting my anger acted out by doing exactly what David said, mirroring the anger, encouraging them, saying, they don't care anyway. If they really cared about it. Every part of me wants to say that, but I think I'd be modeling the exact opposite of what I want to do. So my question is there something I can say in addition to that might be helpful to those students? I mean, Elaine has an insight. She realizes that part of what the students feel as they're getting ready to leave is there's been a lot of turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, Elaine, something I thought of, and then I have to go. Maybe they're thinking they might be doing future schooling, so maybe they want to potentially stay in touch in case they wanted a reference. I don't know, but that thought came to my mind when Larry said about masters or future schooling. So I don't know, but if that is, but could be a reason.
Mm-hmm.
They might need us specifically for a reference if you're in a class, for sure. And I guess Elaine would probably say, well, feel free to contact me. Send
absolutely.
It here. I'm still glad to be a reference. If I'm not there, that could be a possibility. Any number of things. What if Elaine acknowledged not her anger, but their anger? You guys are upset. I think part of why you're upset is because you've had a lot of turnover. Have you communicated that? As you're getting ready to leave the school, have you found a appropriate way to communicate some of your feedback around your concern about this, so that faculty know about it? Would that be helpful? I think so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's one of those that I've learned in here before, one of those things that, never gets said to students, and they're like shocked that someone, I guess addressed the elephant in the living room sort of thing. Yeah.
Yes, without giving them my elephant to worry about.
Yeah.
They got enough with their own.
Yeah.
At that point. So I want to acknowledge what they're really saying. At least I heard them. I want to let them know that I'm also going to miss them. David, thank you so much for the example.
Oh, thank you.
And we will be interested one way or another in knowing how it works out.
I will happily share.
You can be part of the next article.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we write. So I want to do that, but I also want to give them some advice. I'm a faculty member. I see myself as in between the larger school and the students. If students are coming and really raising this larger issue, I can ask them, have you tried? Has it been difficult? In my particular case, the students said they didn't feel safe. Yeah. And I said, well, that makes it even more important, and I conveyed that to faculty, that we had students who didn't feel safe. And that's a pretty serious problem. So what could we do to help them feel safer, to be able to communicate? And some said they'll share it when they're out, after they're finished. And that to me was the most troubling piece of it. So we're doing a survey. we're doing a survey. Amy's just finding out about it. We're doing a survey, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. It won't be a big job, don't worry. And we'll get you back
I
on.
believe that, Larry.
No, it's true. No, I got someone else to do the data entry and analysis. I just need some help right now because that person's away. So it's not going to be a huge burden. And it'll be interesting for you also. So I think you could be helpful to these students without crossing a professional, personal boundary. And you could resist, because I know you're feeling it, right?
Yeah.
But you won't like it in the end. In the end, if you do it, you always regret it afterwards.
I don't really feel that's appropriate in any way. So, and I really do, I like the faculty there, and I wouldn't do anything to undermine them. So, it's just like any other place you work. There's always things that if it was up to you, you'd do differently, but I wouldn't undermine them in any way. It's a really good place. And
does that mean we can get you back here to do some teaching?
Yeah.
Good. Good.
Yeah, definitely. And so, the other part is exactly like what you did with David, and what I need to do there is with my junior class, which I've spent much more time with. I'm very connected with that class. I have to suck it up and bring it up. I have to bring it up, even though it's that, I've terminated with millions, it seems like millions of clients, and it's always hard, and it's, for me anyway, it's never gotten any easier. It's always hard to do, but that has been my thought, is that at least for my clients, so many times they never had good endings, and I had to do it, whether I liked it or not. I had to do it because that was right to do, and I have to do it now with this whole group, even though I don't want to address it.
Over the years of teaching, and I've had a lot, over 40 years, I know there were periods of time where I felt too comfortable about endings, and I had to stop and ask myself, how come I feel so comfortable? And there was a lot of denial going on. In other words, I wasn't really addressing the ending and the emotions that were associated with it. It becomes so intellectual. I write books about it. I have examples. I teach it. But to go through it, you got to really feel it. And to go through it in the circumstances that you're dealing right now, where a big part of you is crying out to say, God damn them. I think that's even harder.
Yeah, because what I really want to say to that junior class is, I absolutely want to be here with you next year to finish up your program and watch you complete this process and help you to make the transition to graduate school. That's what I want to do, but I can't, and that's hard, So, that's tough.
You got to find a way to communicate that without making it sound like I've been done to and I'm a victim, and you should feel even guiltier. I think guilt is going to be part of it for your students too. There'll be some sense of guilt that somehow they didn't save you. And I don't want them to feel guilty. That has nothing to do with them.
No, I have to acknowledge that I knew from the start this was a one-year contract.
That's a professional thing to say.
I knew that.
And I will miss it. It would be nice if I could have had another contract to allow me to see you guys through. I would have enjoyed that. But the realities of the circumstances means it wasn't possible.
Yeah.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
And that's it. And anything else becomes a rallying cry. And believe me, I was a real radical. Maybe I still am in some ways, but I was a real radical in those days. And when the students said they were ready to go on strike at that school, it would have been a big mistake.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been in their interest. It would have been acting out on my part if I had encouraged them to do that. And I've always been glad that I didn't. I resisted temptation because I was so angry at the faculty members at that school. Of course, it was nice 3 years later, when that school adopted my textbook.
Did they really?
And 5 years later, when I got invited back on Alumni Day to give a keynote address,
Hi guys.
I had a little tongue-in-cheek, after having, had such a rough time there. But it had there were contextual issues that were at work. That had nothing to do with me. It's just the reality that I went through. Is this helpful at all?
Yeah, I really felt like I needed to talk about it. Yeah.
You just need us to tell you to do what you know is right.
Because I've been worrying about it. What should I do? What should I do? So it's like, yeah. And part of it, it's just avoidance. I don't want to have to deal with it. But,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think you will.
I will. Oh, yeah.